I'm very pleased today to be able to introduce Jean Brennan to you. She is the Appalachian Landscape Conservation Cooperative Coordinator, and that's a lot of words, but when Mark Thurman and I are at the meeting, which we are both on the steering committee of, we call her boss. So let me give you a little background information on her because she's led an amazing life. She started getting into her career in school at the University of Pennsylvania and then at Yale. And those are two very prestigious universities, but at least for us here in Tennessee, the highlight of her college career was when she got her PhD from the University of Tennessee. So she went on from there in several different jobs, not the least of which was senior conservation scientist with the U.S. Agency for International Development and staff scientist for the State Department in the Office of Global Change. And I kind of have to read this next to you because this is just, for those of us in the biological field, this is like dying and going to heaven. She's conducted research on primates in Kenya, carnivores in Madagascar, Asian elephants and other endangered large mammals in Malaysia, orangutans, and proboscis monkeys on Borneo. And one day we were at the meeting and I was talking to her about this and I said, you know, you've actually got more credentials than Jane Goodall does. But most recently, before she took this job, she was senior climate change scientist for one of the conservation nonprofits, national conservation nonprofits. But currently, and we've probably fallen off the track with this because we probably should have come to you before now talking about LCCs and our involvement in them and what they do, but since we failed at doing that, now is the best time we have to do that. So Jean, if you're ready to explain all that to the commission and folks here.
I'm a little vertically challenged, so I'm going to So, Mr. Chairman and distinguished commissioners and guests and Director Carter, thank you so much for this invitation to join you today. As Bill mentioned, what I'd like to do is tell you a little bit more about landscape conservation cooperatives, and then to give you a very short update in terms of what we're doing in the Appalachian LCC. Hopefully that will give you a little bit of a flavor of what we're involved in. But I'd like to start out with what are LCCs, or landscape conservation cooperatives, and how did they come about, go into the why, the who's, and the wherefores, if you will. So let me start with what is an LCC, or landscape conservation cooperatives. That was a design looking across taxa, so it wasn't just birds. There's a national bird breeding survey that has been done to identify the particular regions, but also the fish habitat partnerships and the fish regions and major drainages. So using those as a guidance, so not just one taxonomic organism, but multiple, to redefine how we would look at the landscapes and manage appropriately. So when you look at those from a scientific standpoint, we identify 22 nationally, but they actually expand into international territories and nations. And those landscape conservation cooperatives are looking at biologically relevant and landscape level processes as the dividing characteristics. So as you can see, that far exceeds most states in how they're organized. So there are 22 of those, but how did they come about? Well, it was an initiative through the Department of Interior looking at how we're going to manage in this coming century, looking at all the major land use change transformations and other relevant stressors, including that of climate change. And so in 2009, then Secretary Salazar issued a secretarial order that instructed the department to establish this type of network. So not only define these larger ecological landscapes, but to create them as an integrated unit, a network of landscape conservation cooperatives, and instructed all DOI entities, all of the various bureaus and agencies, to work together with all the federal agencies that are in that same footprint, including the states and tribal or indigenous peoples that overlap those areas, and hopefully to also engage the local governments and the public into that agenda. What the need was and why they were created was to craft these landscape level strategies. We needed to manage for climate impacts, but also for those larger land use change that we were looking at coming into the century. So why were they proposed? Well, I've already given you a bit of a hint for that. We all are very much aware of the changes in our habitat, loss of open spaces. Population pressures are among the major drivers and all the associated factors. If you look at the demographics of the US population from 2000, that's what the population was, 304, the blue being just population densities. But what we're looking at is by the end of this century, it will triple. It will be 1 billion into that. And how does that look? Well, we already know a bit of what that's looking like. If you look at just the housing that is associated for the populations, and you move that forward through time from 1940 into the present, as well as where that's going, you can see this trajectory. So 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 2000, where we are right now, where we're going, and what that landscape is going to look like very soon. So our ability to meet our mandates, to take care of our trust responsibilities, and to ensure the sort of recreation and environmental benefits that we have and are responsible for are going to be very, very challenged. We have resulted in these highly fragmented landscapes due to these changes in our land use and that various types of urban expansion. That is incredibly challenging to us as natural resource managers, and the reasons for that is that we have historically relied on protected areas as being our safeguard, our anchor, if you will. And that relied on the ability for dynamic equilibrium, species' ability to move as they needed to. What you're looking at in this picture is the Hines National Wildlife Refuge, surrounded by the city of Philadelphia and the Philadelphia Airport. So you can see that it's become very challenging for most of our resources that we're responsible for, the biological ones, to move in response to their needs and in response to those encroachments or loss of habitat. That means that we must manage differently. And so what I'd like to do is go through some of those examples in, again, that explanation of why we are working at these landscape level. And of course, we have various mechanisms, and we have used that over time to try to address these challenges that we have in allowing species to move, hopefully to keep populations intact, and again, to have them respond to those changes as they needed to. Another aspect of the why was it proposed is because we actually have already observed rain changes. And so that means our habitat is dramatically changing in response to changes in the climatic zones. So this is just the National Arboretum's, USDA's plant hardiness. Any of the gardeners in the group know what this is. It just tells you where to plant your winter plants and shrubs. In 1990, this was showing you just how the United States profile looked like. They discovered in 2006 they had to revise that, and it has been revised yet again. And what you're seeing is that northern migration of the habitats and the change in the temperature, especially at the winter. In Florida, it's now becoming subtropical, and in those northern latitudes in Minnesota, for example, we're actually losing some of that boreal forest that we're looking at. The projections as we go into the latter part of the century is complete changes. If you look in the Tennessee regions, you're seeing that moves from an area that has some green to an area that has no green in terms of that temperature zone. So what that means is those shifts actually affect both the structure and the function of the ecosystems. That means that species, ecological interactions, and their ranges will change and have changed. And the consequences of that for biodiversity, as well as the ecosystem services and the resources we're charged with protecting, will be greatly challenged. As managers, what we know is that it's no longer safe to assume that all of the species' habitats in their historic ranges will remain suitable. How are we going to manage differently in that reality? We've often talked about how we go about restoration ecology, restoring damaged areas, mining sites, et cetera, or after fire or clearing. What we need to do is think a little bit more about what that means to us under these pressures. We no longer have the luxury of restoring, of looking backwards. What we need to do is look forwards, and we need to determine how, where, and when that we want to respond to that, either in a response or in anticipating those changes. So by response, I mean, well, we can create protected areas around and make sure we have wildlife corridors. But what I'm talking about in terms of anticipating, we're actually going to facilitate the ability of a species or habitat to accommodate those shifts in the climatic zones and those habitat migrations. Things like planting more appropriate species or projecting the climate conditions or changing the change of disturbance regimes that we rely on, or actually even preventing such perturbations. So we can respond to them or we can anticipate them. And given the scope, what I'm talking about is the LCCs are trying to help managers in that anticipatory phase of that. I have a friend that always calls this, instead of restoration, pre-restoration ecology. It's a new endeavor that we have yet to explore. Part of that, again, is we've seen the zones change in the habitat. We've seen just the annual temperatures change. What that means is that there have been changes in the climate systems and the temperature ranges. If you had just these 6 die and you were trying to capture what they would look like in terms of the colors, that you have in extreme lows and extreme highs. That used to be the profile from the 1950s to 1980s. Basically what that means is under our current period, we have already shifted the dice. That means that our previous highs that you're looking at have been changing from both the mean and variance. So we will have far less of those cold extremes. We will have much more of the hot and warm weather. And we will see record areas that we have never experienced before. What we're looking at there is we're asking ourselves, when is that extreme going to happen? And basically, if you look at most of the, just following the temperature projections, that's about in 10 or 15 years. And what we want to do is make sure that we're able to accommodate that increase in variability. So what that means to the resources that we're responsible for is that it will exceed the thresholds of their biological capacity. In exotherms, those that rely on the external temperatures, like reptiles and insects or the corals, for example, exceeding their thresholds will actually mean that if they cannot move, then they will be forced to have population contractions or population losses and possibly even extinctions. If you look at how that means for species that are challenged vertically, for example, when that temperature changes and those areas become warmer in these hypothetical species A and B, species A basically runs out of area. They run out of a temperature zone that they can tolerate. We've already seen that in such species like the pika, that it has exceeded that, and California is showing that range change. So what does that mean, again, for how do we want to manage differently? Relying on the historic areas and protected areas means that we need to challenge that. We need to make sure that we have genetically viable and we can have species that are able to respond in their evolutionary potential, lack of inbreeding, for example. And one of the examples, if you just look at this graphic, and I'm using the colors as showing you some sort of range change, some sort of ideal tolerance. And if you had animals in these two protected areas, or plants, or whatever you wanted to look at, and that's the color that's compatible across that geography. The question is, how are you going to manage when the species need to be moving in those directions as it changes? When you're looking at them moving themselves, they would like to move into those areas. How are we going to do that when they can't reach those areas? In the case of the Forest Service, they've already started doing that. Those plants that have a more heat tolerant, for example, or even the species selection after a fire or after clearing, they're actually deciding, well, do I take the seed stock from the same area or further south? Do I leapfrog them? Do I take them all the way up? So they're actually starting to play with some of those management responses and deciding how best to achieve that. There will be some species, some habitat, some ecosystems that simply will not be able to move. That's the case of many of the saguaros or the Joshua Tree National Park, for example, that will be limited and cannot move even with some management facilitation. That means that the managers that you're here to support are challenged with a new era of how they do business. They must rely on these predictive sciences. They must be able to manage for this sort of disruptive change. If our resources, if the quality of life, if the recreational values that we hold dear are to be sustained. So I'm going to switch now and to talk to you about the specific for the Appalachian LCC and what these our cooperatives are looking like. Again, remember that it was set up to be that network. They were to function as self-directed partnerships. They were to be both a science and management partnership because, again, under this changing climatic conditions, we don't exactly know how best to manage or facilitate the adaptation. And we need to inform those that are on the ground how to manage differently at this landscape scale, so even beyond the state boundaries. And what the LCCs are charged with doing, they're charged with making sure that the information gets to the managers and decision makers to inform their investments and where they are going to try to conserve, to bring the tools and the information to make those management decisions, and then to assist in this great landscape conservation design endeavor that will extend past their geographies. But most importantly, this is a partnership that is committed to achieving a shared vision based on shared needs. In just one, this example is just to show you that LCCs are not the same. And just looking at the Western Alaska Plains and Prairie Pothole and the Appalachian LCC, for example, you see that the challenges are very different, the decision-making body is very different, and of course the resources are very different. Just looking at our geography, for example, much of the Appalachian LCC is in forested, state-owned or public trust, and very small percentage of that is in the federal lands. But our major driver that we need to address right now is more in terms of the energy development and how that can go forward, and especially given our increased interest now in having more domestic and sustainable energy required for our needs and our growing population, and how can we do that in a win-win situation, in a non-conflict ability to do that where we all have our values represented. Again, what you're looking at is just that spectrum of those large impacts. At the very far north, we're looking a lot in terms of emerging industries related to natural gas development, hydrofracking, of course, traditional coal mining. Here in Tennessee, your experience are these extreme weather events, and I think you've all experienced that with your extreme droughts or extreme flooding of recent years, and of course urban expansion and the change and loss of agricultural lands and they're being converted. What we're talking about in terms of the shared vision and shared commitment, the organizing framework that the Appalachian LCC Steering Committee, a body of 30 individuals from different organizations, came together to say, okay, what is our shared vision? And it's basically that really what we want to be talking about in 20 years is not how to, but the fact that we have ecological integrity, environmental benefits, and we have sustainable wildlife populations. If you look at how our organizing principle exists, it's within these three circles of the science, the research community, the management community, and very importantly, the non-traditional conservation partners that we can engage, the local communities and land planners to engage them, and the LCCs are simply working at that interface to bring all the relevant folks together to start dialoguing and crafting a path forward. In terms of who's represented, we have state, federal, tribal representation, NGOs, and regional partnerships, all that are at the table, all trying to decide how best to move forward. So let me talk to you a little bit about where we are right now in terms of our evolution and representation and decision making. Of the 15 states that are in our geography, it's very challenging because I cross most federal administrative boundaries. There are multiple regional authorities in terms of Fish and Wildlife, USGS, national parks, EPA, et cetera. So that has incredible challenges. I've already learned that when I'm in Pennsylvania, I talk about the Appalachian LCC, and I'm down here, I talk about the Appalachian LCC. So there is a cultural divide, and I do have that in many different ways. In terms of Tennessee Wildlife Resource Commission, we have 2 of your members represented. Mark Thurman is here representing Tennessee Wildlife, but Bill Reeves, also with Tennessee Wildlife, wears a dual role with the regional partnership in terms of the Southern Aquatic Research Partnership. So you have kind of double duty representation for your resources in our geography. What I wanted to do is just put into this kind of overlay, because as you see, about 75% of Tennessee is within the Appalachian region, and kind of just give you some sense of how that overlays with your districts. Where do we stand now, and where's our approach? Well, it is a science and management partnership. We had a science workshop. It involved 151 scientists, managers, north to south, east to west. All sorts of these thematic areas came together to develop what we call our science portfolio. It's not what do we need, but in total, what are all the things that are needed. And then what we do is each year we review them to decide which is the most critical that has to be addressed right now or has a great opportunity for synergy. Those are then go into our 5-year work plan. In 2012, our steering committee came together and said, this is what we want you to do, meaning staff, this is my contract that I execute based on their needs. And they identified 4 goals. Just for a shorthand notation, I'm just telling you the goals represent, they want the tools and the data. They needed these planning strategies as well as various predictive models. And then they wanted assistance in reaching out, communicating with the public, as well as reaching within, communicating with your own organizations and with your own committees to make sure that that is understood and is part of the awareness. The partnership itself is designed to work and implementing through a conservation framework. Whatever you call it and however you organize it, it's the same conservation design. You plan, you design, you deliver, you monitor. The difference in that one is that research has often been out of that, or research has been outside of the management needs, and we're purposely making sure that that gets integrated into what the managers need on the ground. So where we are right now is we have been funding since 2011 a number of projects. I'm just going to highlight a couple of them for you. These show you the types of areas of research that the Appalachian LCC has funded in terms of stressors, vulnerability impacts, management response, meaning creating decision support tools, or basic foundational information. This one, which is just recently completed, is that of assessing the future energy impacts or footprint across our geography. We have developed, and this will be rolled out here this next month, this tool where you can go in, and what's showing you on the left is just showing you the Marcellus Shale and Utica Shale formations, and the purple that you see there are forest priority areas for conservation. And so what we're trying to do is say, instead of being reactive and instead of being in conflict, let us look forward and decide where things need to go and engage society, engage industry, engage land planners to decide how best to support both our need for, especially in this case, energy, but also our society, the things that we value, and the sort of recreation. And then on the bottom right, what you're looking at is you can blow up those areas to any size that you want. I'm just showing you, again, those forested areas, but you're looking at wind potential development, and of course the high ridges and the interior plateau and the Blue Ridge are high areas that are being looked at for wind development. So it's not just the footprint, but it's also the infrastructure to support those expanding energy needs. Another one that I'm just going to show you in terms of our management decision support tools is one related to the eastern brook trout. That's what the yellow is showing you, that footprint, if you will, that when you go into that and you want to figure out how to do restoration of streams based on the climate, how are you going to go about doing that? Well, one of the things that we're looking at is we're trying to get the exact location of both the populations as well as the stream reaches. Under climate change, that tool has looked at not just the temperature, but when you look at especially our mountain region, you have solar gain, aspect slope. The geography means a great deal as far as whether or not that stream reach will be climate resilient. And if you want to invest now into restoring and putting plants on the ground that will yield in 20 years, and connect populations so that your populations have a cool stream and can move and connect populations, connect and build viability of populations, that's what this tool allows you to do. It's showing you those places on the reach where it's the best investment based on the climate resilience and your ability to connect populations. So that's the sort of decision support tools we're trying to invest in and deliver to our various members. This last one is just one in terms of foundational. There's a lot that we don't know, and the cave and karst formations across our geography is one of those. This is one that's using the best scientific information to look at the geological underpinnings. We're not surveying these areas. We're looking at where's the geology tell us it's likely to be forming these sorts of cave and karsts. And based on that, where is it likely to have unique biodiversity? Or in this example, it's showing you where it might also support the various threatened or endangered bats populations. So again, if you're planning, if you're developing, if you're setting out zoning targets, knowing where these might be, even though you have not yet surveyed them, allows you to get ahead of that potential conflict and have informed. So as business people, you know, if you can manage risk ahead of time, that helps you make a better investment. So again, we're trying to use foundational information, but also in an applied sense to achieve those sorts of directions. Where do we stand right now? Well, we've talked about that planning cycle. We have just moved into the actual planning part of that. We've been funding the research. We have our organization and our game plan, and we've started that planning cycle. This is a rather complex graphic, but all it's trying to do is show you that we are assembling various technical teams. The top one is natural resource. The next one is cultural resources. The one after that looks at threats and environmental benefits. So those ecosystem services that nature provides to our populations for free. And then those other sort of socioeconomic identifications. So flood risks, for example, may be one of the considerations that go into that. Taking all that relevant information, putting it into a landscape level modeling tool, and running that. When we'll look at our geography because of the extent, we actually identify 3 regions. It's north, south, and west, but you might recognize it more as central Appalachian, southern, and that western or interior low plateau all the way over Kentucky and into Illinois and Indiana. So those are kind of the unique regions and unique habitats, and we will meet with people, experts on the ground, populations, come up and say, what are our priorities? Because again, LCCs are a commitment. Where do you want to work, and how are you going to do that, and where are you going to rally your resources? When I talk about managing differently, what I'm saying is you need to, and we need to look at a very different spatial and temporal horizon. It may mean that we'll need to have a different prioritization, and that can be by species or population goals, or even harvesting limits, for example. It will require experimentation. And those sorts of things that I was talking about with Forest Service, for example. Well, do we take it from the very bottom, or do we do leapfrog? Those sorts of experimentations are going to have to happen. And again, it will require that we have these predictive tools and that we have monitoring in place to inform those and have the strategies. But more importantly, the one tool that is in that toolbox is the human one. That's your managers, that's your wildlife authority here that will be managing for this disruptive change and the ability to facilitate our resources surviving into your children's lifetime and the generation. Aldo Leopold has said that that sort of coordination, however, has to happen and has to be built from the bottom up. I'm showing you the two steering committee partners. When we received the invocation today, there was a phrase that reminded me of this slide, and at the end of it, in which the preacher said, Father, guide their path. And so I think really that's what we're doing, is guiding the path of the managers, and as commissioners, also guiding that support for that challenge. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there any comments or questions from anyone?
Yes, ma'am, where does your funding come from?
As a partnership, excuse me, it is whatever any of the partners bring into them. The core funding in terms of staffing, and staffing for LCCs are minimal. They're coordinator and science coordinator. I'm very cost effective. I wear both hats for you. From right now, Congress moves it to DOI. Whoever happens to be the entity, and in my case it happens to be Fish and Wildlife, or what they call Region 5, administers that, and that money comes to the cooperative. So administratively, that's handled through the Fish and Wildlife in the account, but the project, the research money, et cetera, comes to basically the cooperative. The steering committee decides how to use those funds. And I said it's a partnership because what you also look at is those other entities that put in money or in kind or collaborative work, or for example, the SARP or Eastern Brook Trout have put in a tremendous amount of collaborative money into building the partnership. So it's very large, and it varies by LCC the amount of leveraging that represents.
One more question, ma'am. I know that a stream credit is approximately $225 a foot, and a wetland credit can be $25,000 per credit acre. And I noticed there about the bats. Have they yet to establish the value of a bat credit? And I know no other term to
Well,
call
I
it,
know.
but
I actually have heard that from farmers' perspective.
Well,
how many millions of insects they eat and things like that. I haven't, but can I also add one aspect of that? When you look at all of those endangered species of bats, and you look at the change of the habitat, and in relation to climate, you will find that the Appalachian region and the mountains are going to be the refugia. So what we put on the ground and what we keep on the ground in terms of that taxonomic group might be it. So, the economic values I've only seen in terms of agricultural products, less so in terms of pollination, things like that.
Thank you.
I'm almost scared to ask a question because it's usually don't ask them unless I already know the answer. But
Okay, well then I'm easy. This will be good. I can say anything, can't I?
Let's dumb this down for me. Are you basically talking about, after your research and projections, that we're talking about taking seeds from various plants and tree acorns and things and physically moving them northward so that after all of this, what are you actually physically going to try to do?
Sure.
Because pardon me for being skeptical, I don't know how we can change the environment. when it's so global. I don't know how you physically just start planting plants and you do those things trying to run north.
Sure.
Maybe I'm
If-
missing it, but I don't
Right.
know what you're trying to do.
No, I'm happy to give you an hour-long presentation on that, but to answer it quickly, yes, we have many examples, and I will tell you right now, it's not what are you going to do, but what are they already trying. So the plant issue that you just asked about, yes, Forest Service is required after clearing or after a fire to do the restoration work. And so they're sitting there going, well, do I take the same seed stock from that forest, or in the case where we know that it has a northern migration, do I take it from further south, because that's what the temperature, when those trees grow up, this is what the temperature is going to be like, and we know that gene stock has already been exposed to it. So that's one example. You go down to the Florida Keys, and I talked about coral bleaching. There are the corals there respond to the temperature and it's called clades, and so certain kind of species or clades are more heat tolerant, and they actually have an underwater nursery to create coral clades based on that certain sort of temperature according to that geography. So it's like having a plant nursery. They're doing that, and then they're populating it around so that you don't lose the coral reef when those corals die, and that supports all of the fish and fishing industry, et cetera. That's another example. When you look at our eastern prairies, for example, when those northern tree migrations happen, because most invasives are going to outcompete the domestic, the natives, if you will, or the residents, then what you do is when those areas start moving, you preferentially plant, and they are putting in prairie grasses that will move to that area ahead of invasives. So if you don't want the whole geography to be invasives and you want that, what they call analog habitat, to be in that future, you start investing now, creating now, and there are other species that they're all biological, organismal species as well that are doing that, where you're leapfrogging populations of fish that have been in one reach to another, or you're selecting entirely different species. On the coast, you're doing more salt-tolerant species as sea level rises when you're putting in trees. So again, I'm happy to answer all those and show you where.
Well, is part of the discussion, what happens if you begin doing this and your projections are incorrect? And we don't continue in 100 years to warm, it begins to cool, and we talked yesterday about the Alabama bass coming into our lakes, and they're not supposed to be here, and they're invasive, and they're causing problems with the existing populations. And if, it's kind of like planting kudzu somewhere where it's not, shouldn't be, and all of a sudden you don't need it anymore, or starlings, or whatever those might be, you end up causing more problems than you cure. So
that's true.
Is that part of the discussion?
Oh, yeah, it's a long discussion. But the issue there is, number one, all of these things that I'm talking to you about is observed, instrumented trends. And so when you look at the temperature records just based on, water gauges and temperature gauges, where is that going? And can any of the managers make any scientifically sound basis to say, well, I think it's going to stop or it's going to go down? Well, there's no justification for that at this moment. So the issue is, as managers that have a responsibility, a legislatively mandated responsibility for trust resources or economic resources, they have to manage under the best information available. So again, it's like you investing in the stock market. You take the best information that you have. If you have any scientific basis to alter that, then you should. And that's what I'm telling you, is that linear trajectory in terms of both hydrological and temperature changes that have been observed and recorded, continue in that pathway, and it would be irresponsible for your managers to just say, well, I don't think that's going to happen. So that's the starting platform. And then it's very much a discussion after that we are going to have to decide what it is. And that's what I said, that the issue of, it may require change in prioritization. So yes, what is it that you want? Do you want those invasives to move in there, or do you want the prairie restoration? So it's an active, conscious decision, and that's why we had the 3 circles. All society should be involved in that discussion. What does our America look like, and how should we invest in it?
Thank you very much. Anybody else have comments or questions? Director?
Okay.
I just want to make a couple of comments in relation to work that Gene and others do. I know many of you remember Greg Wathen, who was our chief of wildlife for a number of years. And Greg still works for the agency, but he's also the coordinator for the Gulf Coastal Plains and Ozarks. That's another LCC. Then between the Gulf Coastal Plains and the Appalachian, south, then when you look at the number of species that are potentially going to be listed or already listed between those 2 LCCs, it's the greatest biodiversity in the United States. And Tennessee happens to just be right in the middle of both of those, and that's what a lot of our folks are having to deal with. So I want to give you a couple of real world examples of how this works with us. Our land acquisition program, when we're trying to buy land, we try to buy land that's either unique in that we're trying to preserve for some particular reason, or something that adjoins something we already have. Wildlife management areas that have land that adjoin it, and then that's what we're going to try to buy. And then we're looking at corridors being north-south primarily. That's why Tackett Creek was so important to the agency and to not only to provide hunting opportunities, which it overlaps with easily and joins our North Cumberland, takes us all the way up into Kentucky, and that way, as you have migration of animals, Bill was talking yesterday about turtles trying to run as they were doing prescribed burning. That's kind of an example in short term of what's going on nationally. The hemlocks that are dying out in the eastern part here, and our agency spent thousands of dollars on trying to slow that hemlock down, because the hemlocks, it's not only climate change that's causing that, but also there's some insects that are causing that to die as well. When those trees die off, there's nothing to keep the streams cool, the streams warm, and then the brook trout, our only native trout, it's got to move because it can't take warmer temperatures. So all of these things are falling into place that we didn't have to really deal with that very long ago. When the 2 floods that came most recently, for years we were taught in school, don't worry about cottonmouths. They're nowhere east of the Tennessee River. After the first flood, Clarksville had cottonmouths laying all over everybody's decks. So north of Nashville, all the way into Kentucky, that's how much that range has shifted. If you live in Middle Tennessee, you've got armadillos in your backyard. We didn't see those for a long time. So all those things, just saying this, the reason both of these LCC concepts are so important to Tennessee is because of our great biodiversity. And we border 8 states. Nobody else in the nation has to worry about so many states. Missouri and Tennessee both border 8. And we worked with reciprocal agreements for years because wildlife does not recognize boundaries. So that's why LCCs were developed through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and why they're funded that way, and why our people are so involved in them, because we're trying to do that same planning. One last little thing is that when the Southeast directors met in Nashville in 2011, we decided to try to put together a Southeast conservation adaptation strategy to deal with all the 15 southeastern states. They asked me to be the coordinator between the Southeast states and this concept, and Cindy Donor, who's the Southeast director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, is the director from the federal side. We took it to the federal folks, and every single federal entity in the Southeast is now on board with that and has a person that's helping coordinate that, because we're not looking only at climate change, but as all the things that Gene brought out, the urbanization, the shift in energy and shift in water resources. For years, the South never worried about water, and now we do. You know, every time we have a drought, Georgia tries to take water out of the Tennessee River down in Chattanooga. So all those things, I don't want to beat all that to death. I just wanted to tell you there are a lot of real world examples. And Bill and Mark, I appreciate all that they've done in this one. We have other people who are working in the other LCCs. And Bill is kind of double dipping for me with the Department of Interior to the Secretary of Interior wanted to appoint a climate change committee to make sure that wildlife was a part of the planning. And I was picked to be the person for the Southeast to sit on that federal advisory committee. Every meeting we've had has corresponded with a commission meeting, with the exception of one. So I've been to one meeting and Bill's been to all the rest. So I appreciate all he's done with that. And anyway, I just want to make those comments because there's real world examples that we're dealing with every day. And although the LCCs seem like a big concept, there are things that we've tried to do for years through reciprocal agreements that now have a central coordinator. And we appreciate all you do, Gene.
Anyone else? Did I see a hand? Mike Butler, you didn't have anything. Did I see a hand back there? Okay. Mr. Chairman, I believe that's all we've got.
All right. Thank you, Vice Chairman Cox. At this time, we will go to Fisheries and Chairman Jeff McMillan.
Thank you, Chairman Griggs. I'm going to ask Chief Wilson to come up just to answer questions. I don't think we need to go through your presentation again. So I'm going to go ahead.
Burp. Excuse me.
Chairman Griggs, the Fisheries Committee met and voted to recommend approval of Proclamation 14-17 for sport fishing regulations yesterday.
All right, I'm taking that as a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, is there any discussion? Okay. Chairman Baker.
Excuse me, I got choked on my bubble gum there. I was pretty vocal yesterday on the Fisheries Committee, and I want to apologize to Bobby publicly for being pretty aggressive when we come talking about the smallmouth bass. Thanks to my late grandmother, I have been a bass fisherman since I was probably 4 or 5 years old. Started fishing bass tournaments when I was 14 and qualified for a lot of state tournaments. My mom had to sign permission slips so the bass clubs wouldn't have any liability as a minor, so I could go fish these state tournaments. And then when I went on to college, I started fishing. I fished the regional events and then moved on into the pro ranks and did that for a long time, traveling around the country. And recently I've got back into the regional stuff and been fairly successful. And I've spent a whole lot of time on the water as a fisherman, and I'm pretty passionate about it, to say the least. And I guess my personality kind of overtook yesterday a little bit. And I want to personally apologize to Bobby for probably being too aggressive yesterday.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Secondly, I'd like to, after some consideration and talking to some other people, what I'd like to do is propose an amendment to the smallmouth regulation on Douglas to five fish limit at 16 inches for this next year.
Okay, I'll take that as a motion. Is there a second to that amendment? Second. All right, is there any discussion?
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Cannon?
Commissioner Baker, thank you, both for revisiting the motion, and also we're kind of in the same field, so we have passion probably 5 days a week anyway, so I appreciate where you came from. And Bobby, you know how I feel about you and your group's work. You all have made remarkable progress in building bridges with our fishing community and keeping our resource healthy. These are good changes as far as the amendment is concerned. I would respectfully offer, just as I did yesterday, that this is a change, not near as significant as what we talked about yesterday, but it is a change that I believe I personally would like to give the public a chance to speak to. The person who I followed, Commissioner Chase, The smallmouth issue was all the more passionate, particularly on Norris Lake. And what our Region 4 staff, Bart, your folks, Bobby, having attended those meetings when I first came on board here, the trust, the relationship that you all have built in just the few years I have been on has been remarkable. And I want to keep that. I want to keep that with the overall fishing community and our staff. And so, Mr. Chairman, if this is appropriate, and I'll let somebody correct me if it's not, but I would ask that action on this amendment be rolled to the December meeting solely for the purpose of more opportunities for public input and public interaction with our staff.
Okay, from the chair, if no objection, I will roll Proclamation 1417 to the December 5th meeting. Is there any objection? If not, that will be rolled to December. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Bobby. And, you know, we're all in this together, and the commission and the agency. And I tell you what, we're pretty blessed to have the agency staff that we do. And I call you department heads, y'all are region managers. I'm used to the terms at home, but we have good people. And I think we have a good commission too. And Commissioner Baker, I appreciate you today, sir. All right, this time we're gonna move on to budget. And I'm going to go to Chairman Harold Cannon. Harold, you have the floor.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. The committee heard from Daryl Radijak regarding a grant from Fish and Wildlife to address the white nose syndrome in the amount of $50,000. The committee voted and unanimously approved bringing this before the commission. There are no agency funds involved in this budget expansion.
Okay, I'll take that as a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, motion to pass budget expansion on white nose syndrome, 50,000 grant from USFWS passes. Mr. Cannon.
Mr. Chairman, Chief Radijak also presented a budget expansion of $20,000 related to the Partners Project. This is a grant from U.S. Fish and Wildlife. There are no agency funds involved in this. Again, the committee discussed this, voted unanimously to bring it before the commission. Submitted as a motion in kind.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
All right, I have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, budget expansion for Partners Project, 20,000 grant from USFWS passes. Mr. Cannon.
Chief McKinney brought before us the Cumberland Habitat Conservation Plan with partnering with the Tennessee Nature Conservancy. It is a budget expansion of $615,000. There are agency funds involved in this. However, those were already included in the budget. This budget expansion is solely for our acceptance of the federal funds. Chief McKinney had to leave. Mark Thurman is here to speak and answer any questions that may come up. Otherwise, we recommend that to the commission in the form of a motion.
Okay, all right, do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion for budget expansion on Cumberland Habitat Conservation Plan with the TN Nature Conservancy of $615,000. USFWS passes. Mr. Cannon.
The last budget expansion is proposed by Chief Reeves. He presented and this is an annual allocation that comes up each year, state wildlife grant annual allocation dollars in the amount of $91,251. These are federal funds. Passed the committee unanimously, and we make that in the form of a motion.
All right, do I have a second? Second. Any discussion? All right, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, budget expansion, state wildlife grant annual allocation dollars of $91,251 passes. Mr. Cannon.
Mr. Chairman, I recognize Ken Tarkin, who's Chief of Administrative Services, to update us on our financial situation, and it's a good situation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In your books, there should be a two-page financial report. I'll be reporting on the month ending September of 2004. At the top of the page, the boating fund is approximately 6.2% ahead of where we were at this point in time last year. The expenses are almost 18% of the total allotment. The middle of the page, the wildlife fund, while it shows a negative of almost 6%, there is an ending deposit that was not posted by the Department of Finance Administration until October 1st. We're actually what we would call no growth. We're about the same as we were last year, and last year was a good year financially for wildlife. The senior citizen license sales for the month of September, as you can see, is 1,098. The expenditures in wildlife approximate 17% of the total year's allotment. At the bottom of the page, the endowment fund, the Watchable Wildlife Fund, has 5.8, almost 5.9 million in availability of transfer of interest of 4,700. And the lifetime sportsman account has 37,953,000. Second page identifies the wetlands funds that we have. The acquisition fund balance is 13.5 million. We've zeroed the maintenance account out as we usually do, and the compensation fund, the in lieu of tax, has 424,000. Any questions or comments?
Ken, if you would, this is the not so good news, but it's just the facts of life. On our endowments, would you mind sharing with us the great interest rate that we're getting right now?
Yes, sir. It has, and I've tracked this over a short period of 20 years. It's the lowest we've had. We set another record. It has been relatively stable at 0.07%.
If it's okay, I'm not going to say thank you, Ken.
Yes, sir.
On
That's
that
quite
number.
all right.
No, it's none of your doing. It's what we're bound by. I mentioned that just I want the commission to be aware of that, and that begins to set the one of the foundation blocks for our budget committee meeting next Thursday to discuss that and other revenue-related matters. It is open to the public, be in Nashville beginning at 9 o'clock. Mr. Chairman, if there's no other comments or questions, that's all I had, sir.
All right. Okay, is there anyone else in the audience that needs to address the commission on any matter, any other business? Okay, I would personally, and I'm gonna speak for the commission and I'll give them a chance to speak if they want to, like to thank Region 4 for the great hospitality. I thoroughly enjoyed, along with some of the other commissioners, that had a chance to go to the Hatfield Knob viewing area and view the elk tag, and that was a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and I greatly, greatly appreciate it. And I don't know if Danny Akins is here today. He may be out. I think he is out, but tell him Danny and his wife Linda invited me to their home and fixed me a home-cooked meal, and I really, really enjoyed it and appreciate it. And I congratulate him again on his promotion too. But John, we appreciate the hospitality, really do. And if any of y'all want to make any comments in regards to that, you can at this time.
I'll just make a quick one, and it's I'm home, and it's great to be here and great to see what y'all do. I'll have to say, and I didn't expect it to move me this much, but when we were up viewing the elk and darting the elk and seeing how you all cared for our resource, I got a little teary-eyed. And I was glad that my wife got to be one of the volunteers to participate in that. What you all as an agency, whether it's wildlife, fisheries, whatever, what you all do is absolutely remarkable. And the care that you give just over and over again. Last month, Bobby, I believe it was at the Brook Trout that we had the presentation on, and just the care that you all put into your efforts day in and day out. You do a remarkable job, and I don't know that you hear that enough. Sometimes from the public you only hear the bad, but no, but it doesn't go unnoticed, and we thank you for allowing us to be a part of that for a few minutes this week.
I just want to say that I would be comfortable if all the meetings were in Region 4. And Mr. Fox, I hope you enjoy your drive home.
Also, I didn't get a chance to make the 65th anniversary on the east side. Commissioner Cannon covered that for me. I made the west and the middle, but be sure and relay to all the officers that we appreciate what they do. And I had requested that Officer Dave Carpenter be here today. He was my officer in Henderson County back years ago, but I understand that he and his wife have had a baby, and congratulate him for me on that addition to the family too. But is there any announcements by the AG Director Carter? You have anything you want to add? Okay, anybody else on the commission? All right, if not, our next meeting will be Friday, December the 5th in Nashville. I hope all of you have a safe trip home. I hope you have a good Halloween. Your house doesn't get egged, and I hope you have a good Thanksgiving. We'll see you all in December. We're adjourned.